The person who signs the prescription is accountable for the prescription. In this vlog, I outline the key principles in the Equalities Act 2010 and the Mental Capacity Act 2005 and pose some reflective questions. In addition to the legislation that concerns what we're allowed to prescribe, the two areas of equality and mental capacity require a detailed understanding and application of the core principles in practice. In this vlog, I summarise the top line of these two Acts of Parliament and pose some questions for reflection, which we can use individually and within our teams. I also share sources of information that will help us continue to ensure safe practice. Following this legislation and demonstrating by documenting that it's being followed may present challenges, particularly when we as prescribers are often working under pressure with time limits, resource constraints, and sometimes even in chaotic and unsuitable environments. Also, we may not always have the luxury of having a full history for the patient, or the luxury of using a system which prompts us about interactions and potential adverse reactions. There may also be multiple prescribers involved, or we may be working on a shared care agreement. So firstly, let's look at the Equality Act 2010. This Act builds on and replaces the Disability Discrimination Act of 1995. Here are the main points from the Equalities Act. The Equality Act is a law which protects people from discrimination. It means that discrimination or unfair treatment on the basis of certain personal characteristics, such as age, is against the law in almost all cases. The Equality Act covers age, disability, gender reassignment, race, religion or belief, sex, sexual orientation, marriage and civil partnership, and pregnancy and maternity. Under the Equality Act, employers and organisations have a responsibility to make sure that disabled people can access jobs, education and services as easily as non-disabled people. This is known as the duty to make reasonable adjustments. This concept of reasonable adjustments is very important for us prescribers. This is a major issue for people with learning disabilities and autism, and something that led to the implementation of the Learning Disability Review Programme, or LEADER as it is referred to. This came about because research showed that on average people with a learning disability die earlier than the general public and do not receive the same quality of care as people without a learning disability. Those who work in mental health will know that similar issues exist here. The World Health Organization estimates that there is a 10 to 20 year life expectancy reduction in patients with severe mental disorders. This figure is excluding death from suicide. The vast majority of this is due to chronic physical medical conditions such as cardiovascular, respiratory and infectious diseases, diabetes and hypertension. Issues relating to the lack of reasonable adjustments are highlighted in the tragic story of the death of Oliver McGowan. We referred to the prescribing aspects of this in our previous learning programme, and I've presented on Oliver's story to the NICE Medicines and Prescribing team in 2019. There is much learning to be had and much more to do. Here are some of the areas that students have identified. So here are some questions for reflection. What techniques do you use to identify and provide reasonable adjustments in your prescribing assessments? What are the challenges and the successes you have had in providing reasonable adjustments for your patients? Secondly, let's consider the Mental Capacity Act 2005. There are 5 principles in the Mental Capacity Act. Principle 1 is that the start point is always the presumption of capacity. Principle 2 is about individuals being supported to make their own decisions. Principle 3 is about individuals with capacity being free to make unwise decisions. Principle 4 is about mental capacity decisions being made in the person's best interests. And Principle 5 covers finding the least restrictive option. The Act covers specific decisions ranging from those about finance to where somebody lives, health and welfare, to the right to have sexual relations, to the right to use social media, etc. The Mental Capacity Act is also used to support specific decisions for an individual patient. What's really important here is that assessment of mental capacity is time and decision specific. So if you read in somebody's notes that they have capacity, unless it says what the capacity was for and when the assessment was conducted, it is completely meaningless. Also, harking back to vlog number 5 on errors and near misses, the person best suited to assess mental capacity is always the one who should do this. This is not necessarily the most senior person or the most qualified person. There are no specific qualifications and no rank that qualifies a person to assess mental capacity. Credibility, expertise, track record and experience are key. If a person has been assessed as lacking capacity for something, then any action taken or any decision made for or on behalf of that person must be in their best interest. The person who has to make the decision is known as the decision maker, and normally this will be the carer responsible for the day-to-day care, or a professional such as a doctor or nurse or social worker. And before this is done, you need to check if the person has made a lasting power of attorney, LPA, that covers the decision you're interested in and who their attorney for this is. Alternatively, they may have a court of protection order in place that covers health and welfare, i.e. that includes prescribing decisions. So in this case, you will need to contact their nominated deputy. These attorneys or deputies then need to be involved in the decisions. A decision which, to show best practice and avoid later problems, needs to be well documented and, if possible, needs to show evidence of multidisciplinary team involvement. Another consideration is if the person has made an advanced decision or living will. Of course, the urgency of the situation will influence how all this is carried out. Finally, I'd like to show you a new resource on healthcare and the law, the Adam Bergelian Foundation. Adam Bergelian was an award-winning poet and blogger who was born in Hampshire, England in 2000 and died in Yorkshire from sepsis in 2015. He lived most of his life in Edinburgh, Scotland. Adam acquired cerebral palsy at birth and went on to develop multiple health needs. Despite this, until his last months, Adam lived a full and active life. He was educationally very bright, being top of the class in all subjects in mainstream school. Aged 9, Adam attended a poetry group at his local church in Edinburgh and wrote his first poem that summer. Writing for Adam was exceptionally time-consuming. Due to his cerebral palsy and his tracheostomy, Adam was no longer able to speak, so instead he wrote by spelling out words using a spelling chart or by selecting words from a list that he found online. Here's an example of how ADS Foundation makes the law accessible through concise and highly informative learning materials. Hover on the Resources tab on the website and go to Learn with Dr. Dog. Series 2 of this covers basic concepts in medical law and ethics. Currently, there are 2 topics under this heading: gross negligence manslaughter and the rule of law and why it is important to health professionals. I hope you found this useful, and it provides materials for discussion and reflection. These, of course, can be used in your appraisals, in peer reviews and for revalidation. You'll find a template for reflection here.